Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Tim. We live? We're live. Hey, welcome everyone here in the room. We have a wonderful, handsome crowd, and I'm sure you all online are handsome too. And if you're tuning in a little bit later, we hope to have this posted on our website and Facebook, in addition to the live broadcast. But let me say a prayer, and then we'll get started with some introduction. Lord, thanks for still being the Lord of the church, and the church that you're Lord of, in some ways, isn't exactly like the church that we think we're a part of. You've been calling a movement of the Holy Spirit ever since ever, and we try to box it up, bottle it up, just to capture it, but it's like manna from on high. The gift of every day is the only fresh one. We can't hoard it for tomorrow. We can't feast off the past. It's only by your Spirit that we inhale your breath of life today and share your love. Lead, direct, and guide. This challenge within our denomination is bigger than any one person. One thing I've learned over the years, but we each can take the most faithful steps for us. And we pray that this local body would feel empowered and one and unified as much as ever. We love you, Jesus. In your name, amen. So I only want tonight to be good. There was a lot of activity that was hoped for in the spring, much of which didn't happen, and therefore it changed the landscape moving forward come end of June into July. Now, I could give you all the intricate play-by-play. I'll try to keep it simple and not get too complicated. My wife wants me to remain articulate and not get too wild and crazy on everybody. I apologize if something's confusing. Stop me whenever you want. And we'll pause for questions once I have a chance to share and give you a little bit of a view of the landscape today. But you know, the United Methodist Church has been duking it out since 1968. And last spring,
Good evening. Good evening.
thanks so much. We're going blue. So many had hoped that the spring general conference, the worldwide gathering, would happen in the spring, and that an agreement that had been developed by all the main caucus groups would have been passed called the protocol, which outlined a path forward for those that wanted to stay within the denomination, those that wanted to hear the call of God and help build another more finely tuned Wesleyan expression, holiness movement, congregation, more strictly traditional denomination of the Methodist expression. And then it would have given other pathways for even smaller groupings to come out of that. Well, as part of the political machinations, is that a word? Machinery? What's it? Machinations is the CH. Machinations. The General Conference Committee decided to postpone it one more time for COVID, which was pretty intriguing, but we won't comment too much on that. And so it was going to be pushed, therefore, to the annual conferences, the main issue. And that could have fallen a couple different ways. The way it fell, instead of like Lakeside Annual Conference passing the equivalent of the protocol for us here in West Ohio, that legislation was stalled, and what all the annual conferences are now doing are appealing to a paragraph in the discipline called number 2253 that was passed at the special general conference. I think it was in 2019, and almost as an afterthought, as a measure to help churches through in the interim. But now that's been the main linchpin and the articulated process for any church that wants to disaffiliate. So every now annual conference is using this paragraph, but there are between the annual conferences slight differences. So like in Texas, where it's much more predominantly conservative, one of the annual conferences has raised multiple millions of dollars to help with churches and their exit fees. Our conference, Board of Trustees, has outlined a process. If you've done any property sale lately and gone to buy a house and all the forms you have to sign, well, you get a pack of information about that thick for something like this too. So our Board of Trustees put together a process based on paragraph 2253 that essentially, I hear and understand, would require a church to come up with 2 years' worth of apportionments and their portion of what is called the unfunded pension liability. Thanks, man. In which I understand is roughly about 3 years' worth of apportionments. Now, there's a piece of legislation at annual conference that was to help ease the burden of local churches coming up with that amount all at once. And that didn't get passed. And I can imagine if I was on the Board of Trustees, firmly rooted in keeping my position, I'd say, well, that's up to the church that wants to leave to come up with that money. So really, I don't believe it's insurmountable for any church that really wants to leave. There's ways to do it still. Currently, there are about 15% of the churches in West Ohio that have asked for a packet and have begun the process of disaffiliating. That paragraph 2253 created a window, if you will, of about 2 years where this is possible, and then that paragraph 2253 expires. So people will ask, well, what's provided for after that? There's no promise. There's nothing currently provided for after that. And so the bishop has to do his part and create a special annual conference here in the fall, November 19, to vote on the first grouping of churches that want to disaffiliate. And there'll be another one before the end of the next year to do the same for the last grouping of churches that can disaffiliate. Now, there's also prognosticating. Nobody really knows what percentage of the vote is going to leave between now and then for the eventual general conference. But the vote is pretty tight here in West Ohio. It's almost evenly split, save for like less than 10 votes, I think. Everything tipped one way or the other. So we're a pretty diverse, you can look at it two ways. Diverse conference, or we're a very divided conference. And some days, it feels more divided than pleasantly diverse. I'll stop there and give you a chance to ask a question if you like. Does this work? Yeah, pick that up. Thanks, man. We need to hear it. We need to hear it online. The only way for you to be heard online, friends, is to take a microphone. So
we're good. Here we go.
You don't have that big of a mouth. You might be glad to know.
Jerry Lee Holtzapfel, is there a date set within, at a time the churches have to decide whether they want to remain or want to disaffiliate?
It's pretty much that 2-year window, I believe. And there might be a way after that, but there's nothing in the discipline that says there'll be a way after that, and no promise that a future general conference will provide for that. Yeah, Steve.
Could you be more specific about that 2-year window? When does it begin, and what is that about?
Yeah, that gets into the kind of the part where you all have to go look it up. It's hard for me to keep track of, and I can get in big trouble if I push it too much. So this is the way to go forward from here is if you really want to explore this opportunity is to form what's called a discernment team as an outgrowth of your board. And I mean, I could have called for the estimate. I know I could have probably gotten it. I could have gotten a packet, but I just feel like that's where I'm not allowed to go, and I'm just trying to. It varies somewhat. You know, right now, November 19th has been set, but there's no annual conference date for 2023. That hasn't been set yet. So I think it's the end of the calendar year, December 31, 2023. But there's so many details. Please feel free to double check my information. Yeah.
Okay. What happens when, I mean, I assume that, you know, the churches are going to look at this thing, and they're going to, then the church, they're going to probably have some type of a vote of the membership.
Yeah, that's part of it.
And then, so what happens? I mean, obviously you're going to have some that want to do this and some that don't. So that essentially you're going to have churches, individual churches, splitting as well. Would that be a fair assumption?
In some cases, yes. Now, 2 of the larger churches in Texas just had their votes, and like mega church size churches, and one was 100% to disaffiliate. You know, you might want to talk to the Georgia Secretary of State, you know, and question that, but that was a joke. The other one was like 96.7%. But the threshold, though, is 60%, I believe. So if a local church wants to disaffiliate, it has to be a 60% vote, or 66 even. I've lost track. But that can be a hard threshold. Now, I want to maintain that just because the news media promotes there being either this solution or that solution doesn't mean you only have 2 solutions. You know, I'll just go through some scenarios. If we stayed, nothing's really going to change for us. You don't have a gay pastor, and currently you don't have a policy where you would allow same-sex weddings. And I don't know, being a block from the center of the most conservative county seat in the most conservative county, although they passed DORA, I don't know where they'll feel about this. It's funny when we pick and choose our conservatism. That's a little other comment there for the councilman here in the front row. So. And nothing. What would change? We have some friends that are more liberal that come, and we have plenty of friends in a church policy that probably won't change much, if at all. The same could be said if we left for another denomination. And then my ecclesiastical nerd comes out when I like to think of alternatives that other people haven't thought of, you know. So let's say a church becomes, instead of one or the other, GMC or UMC, they become the local Methodist community church, and within that become a center for all sorts of congregations. Let's say a recovery ministry, or a little more conservative with contemporary evangelical praise band, or a little more closer to mainline with traditional pageantry or things like that. But most people don't have the stomach for that, and I hear, well, if they do this, I'm out. Well, you're giving your mind away, essentially, if you want to simplify it that much. But there's a lot of complexity to it, and I can understand where, for some people, it's just really black and white. Even though I don't even think the Bible is black and white to me, but how that has gotten worked out, like there's no perfect option for me, because I think that the current Methodist Church is just way too hierarchical and institutional. And I think the inflexibility snuffs out the movement of the Holy Spirit sometimes. I think if I stayed, there'd still be too much overhead. Let's get our apportionments down to a smaller percentage than 13 to 15%. This church wants to give all of its apportionments, but then gives another 12, 13% beyond that to all of our mission stuff. So we're living on 80% instead of like living on the 90 as if we tithe. But anyway, maybe I talk too much.
I think
Anybody got a follow-up?
Some
Yeah.
people too talked about going independent, so there might be another thing there. I'm sure that'll be the lower numbers, but that is another option that people have talked about.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. Let's say a church, there's a provision to go independent. You don't have to choose this or that, but we could be Troy First Methodist Church for as long as we still wanted, and carry on based more on our local identity, where everyone's still welcome, and we're not ready to maybe do this or that yet, and we just keep living life together. But people have already, get wigged out on the news and make ultimate decisions on false information. It's disappointing to me, but yeah, Diane.
If we disassociate, who gets the building, and what happens with the financial end of it?
Uh-huh.
Commitments we've made for down the road, not just this year.
Yeah, you might have to ask me some more specific things here in a minute, but I'll respond and then give you a chance to respond back, or anyone else. But that is one of the main benefits, I think, that we can be completely in control of our own property if a church decides to disaffiliate. And what do we have this insured for? Like $8 million or something like that? You can't replace what we have anyway with the stained glass and the stone. So for 5 years worth of apportionments, $250,000, $250,000 to $300,000, this local church would have complete control of its own property. Up until this point, till we take advantage of, if we would take advantage of that clause, we could be in charge of our own property, but right now it's held in stead by all United Methodist churches under what's called the trust clause. And there was a court case out in Texas where this was being challenged, and it was I think at the common police level, the judge said, "Hey, this isn't my business. This is your business. You got your rules and your discipline. You go follow that. separation of church and state, I'm out. And he pushed it back. So in some places, the trust clause has been affirmed. Some places it's been tested. I don't think it's gone to the Supreme Court yet, but when I was in South Carolina with visiting my dad's church, they're a conservative Anglican church, and they tried to leave, but they had to buy their property for several million in the Anglican connection. Did that answer anything for you? Yep, good. We currently have, I don't think, no extenuating commitments. Churches who receive large grants to either build or expand their ministry would be required to pay that back in addition to the 2 and then the 3+ years. But we haven't incurred any grant debt that we would have to do that.
Well, on that subject, we haven't incurred any great debt. We still owe someone this place, don't we?
Yeah, I just meant
what
that in
happened?
reference to the conference and our obligations with the conference. We still owe about 100,000 overall. This has been paid off. That property, the prayer garden's been paid off, and I think we have less than 100 left overall
We have less than 100,000 in debt.
in capital debt. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then let's go to
The
something
current
else.
loan, but when you look at the bank sheet, we also have lots and a foundation, and we're not poor.
Okay, then let's go to something you mentioned quickly, the 2 main choices. Which of those, give me the letters again, would be the tradition? I want everything to stay pretty much the same, let's say. Which of those 2?
I don't know how to answer that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because each one would try to keep a large portion in their minds the same. So of the 2 main promotions, you don't need to pass a vote to stay in the UMC. Doing nothing will keep you in the current UMC. I'm not sure.
That's going to be the name, or at least for now it is.
Or at least for now, but it's hard to call it a United Methodist Church after a split, so I don't know what they're going to call it. But so in the UMC, everything will likely stay the same, except that they currently plan and hope to take out all the language in regard to sexuality in the discipline.
For the UMC side or for both sides?
This would be for the UMC side.
Okay.
The GMC will, in their discipline, tries to keep all of that same language. So like currently in our discipline, says that all persons are of sacred worth, but that something like homosexual practice is incompatible with traditional Christian teaching. Some people like that. Some people have a real challenge to that. And so that'll be one of the main differences between the 2, where the GMC, the Global Methodist Church, will keep that language. The UMC will likely eliminate that language. How the church structure is structured will largely remain the same. A little more fleet in feet as
On UMC you're talking about.
Yes,
Yep.
the UMC. Our district numbers are going to go down from 8 to 6. Some say that's going to spread the load upon the DSs too much. In reality, each district will still have less churches than what they did back in our heyday. So In the GMC, things will look a little different. It won't be so Episcopal in that you won't be a bishop for life. They're looking at plans to, I haven't read it lately, but to allow, tenure, well-respected pastors to stay in their local church and still serve as bishop, or to serve as bishop for a term limited time, and then to come back to the local church. Those are the main differences, but a lot will, I think, still look very much the same. Although the character and leadership, I think, will be very different in that you go to what's it called? An Aldersgate Renewal Movement gathering. Those pastors are probably will most look like what the future GMC pastors will look like. Very more holiness minded, a little more charismatic, very evangelical and conservative biblically.
Now, this is with the GMC.
Right, correct. In the new UMC, I think you'll get more overall a tenor of leadership that's more middle of the road or moderate, and to more progressive theologically and biblically.
So let's assume we have that two-part split. Forget about the little groups for a minute. Ministers would have a choice of going one way or the other. Hey, I want to leave this church and go with the other side. Is that right?
I believe so, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Every church has to decide apart from its pastor, and every pastor has to decide for themselves apart from their church.
Isn't that right too, Chris? Something about you're not a guaranteed appointment like you are UMC. You're a guaranteed appointment,
yeah.
And in the GMC, you're not guaranteed an appointment with the fruit things. Explain that.
Correct. Yeah, the guaranteed appointment might go out the window in the GMC. Does that make everyone understand what I mean by that? Currently, in the UMC, elders in full standing are guaranteed an appointment at a minimum salary and a benefit base. And it was put in to ensure fairness across the diversity of our conference and to make sure we weren't shortchanging women or persons of color. And so there's a minimum salary guarantee, and everyone in good standing is guaranteed a certain level of appointment. That will that guarantee will likely not be a part of the GMC future.
Okay, then a minister is tired of this church, or is having trouble, or it's just time to move now, my kids have graduated, etc. Would we have a search committee to get another one? Would there still be a DS appointment? How would it work?
My understanding is that in the GMC, it'll be much more collaborative. You're looking at me like that makes sense. Collaborative. Where the bishop won't be able to point and click. Say, you're going here no matter what. But there will be more mutual. The district superintendent will work with you, and you in collaboration with the district superintendent will, what's other words that would describe this, will come up with a shared solution.
And the UMC would then say, I say you go.
Bottom line, yes, and but in practicality, there's still a lot of collaboration. You know, I can teach you how to be a stuck in the mud and cantankerous as you want to fend off a district superintendent, or I can teach you how to be just laissez-faire, and that what happens happens. But yeah, Jerry Lee.
Just for a little help here, when you used the word earlier, disaffiliation of the churches, some of the churches had chosen, is that disaffiliating to go with the Global Methodist Church, or that could be disaffiliating for other reasons, like forming their own church?
Correct. It
It's
could
all
be for other reasons too,
Okay.
but it's because I don't know why, you know, how it got branded a certain way, but it's most often talked about in association with the GMC, but it is a technical term that applies to any church that wants to say, you know, we no longer want to be a part of the UMC, we want to do this. And some of those other options that I forgot off the top of my head are Fraser United Methodist Church or Fraser Memorial United Methodist Church, John Ed Matheson's church, disaffiliated to go Free Methodist. You can join another Methodist denomination. There are variety out there too. But.
Okay, just one last question. So I understood it right. If the church would choose to disaffiliate and choose a third option, is that the part where you were saying that you would be able to keep your own church properties?
Yeah, if you follow the annual conference plan, step-by-step plan, the kit that they give you, and the recollection came back stronger in my mind after Steve asked me the question, but I think the window is we got to get all the work. I hate to say it, how that was just coming out, but for a church to disaffiliate, they would need to get all their work done by December 31 of 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If a church makes a change and their pastor stays with the church, does the pastor, how is the pastor's retirement handled in that case?
Yeah, a couple of years ago, the pension arm took care of that so that they are now equipped to hold the pensions of a variety of different Methodist expressions. So when you're as old as I am, your pension is going to be just fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So one of my concerns on this is that either we'll talk about our church here, is that either we may decide to disaffiliate or we may decide to stay, and then we may have a portion of the church that's not going to be happy with that decision, no matter which way it goes, and so that minority leaves. And so my question and my concern is, being on the trustees, this place is a money pit. And I don't think, if we lost 25 or 30% of our congregation, that the remaining membership could support and keep the church running, just from a physical, the physical plant costs. So I know that overall may not be a big concern, but I'm also thinking, well, at the end of the day, it'd be conceivable that whoever stays here couldn't afford to be here.
That would be one of the possibilities, I imagine. There's share a little bit, I guess. You guys get to figure out what it looks like, but I get to help promote, and I hope you all would help promote all through this, the unity of our church right now. You know, we all get to believe what we want to believe. We all are believing what we want to believe. And we have a mix within the congregation. And yet, God's still doing great things, and we're having fun. You know, we're learning to treat each other with respect and love as brothers and sisters. So I hope we could focus on that. But there are, you know, other ways to increase your revenue, take leased out portions or parts, this, that, and the other. We have a very, very, very conservative view of our economic capacity. And I just want to say, there is no church that has more means than you. Can I just say that and just keep repeating that, you know? You're providing for as much as Upper Arlington did, friends. So let's not shortchange what we can do for God when we want to do it, you know? You know, we have the nicest sanctuary with the nicest organ between at least Lima and Dayton. And we will have one really awesome daggum recital hall if we get that extra bank of pipes in someday, you know? It is a beautiful location for any kind of concert, you know? Hainer can't afford to build on at a level that could compete with that. And we don't need to be an Arbogast because some things are meant to go in there, you know, so all sorts of ways to do that. We have a neighbor that has a brewery now in it, so hey, you know, church could turn into a brewery. And that's the recovery ministry was. Thank you. I'd say that would be the worst thing. But, you know, we're in Dora, so why not? We just, communion wine. Let's go back to real communion wine. I think that might be the answer, you know. People show up. No? Sorry, Tim. Being too stupid and facetious. Steve.
I was wondering about the whiteboard and what kind of pictures you're going to draw for us.
That was put there so I wouldn't draw on it. I can draw any picture you want, but I don't think it'll be that pretty. I like using whiteboards, but I haven't felt the need to use it tonight yet.
You guys don't want that.
Yeah, Ron.
Got a question. I was thinking, would both be preaching from the same Bible? We haven't mentioned the Bible very much. Are we going astray from the Bible that we know? There's really only one Bible that I know of. So, what?
Actually, there's multiple versions of the Bible, Ron, and so we've used the New Revised Standard Version. The New Revised Standard Version just newly revised its standard version, and I will not use it. I'm dangerous enough that I know the translators, at least one or two in every version that there is, and so my favorite Bible is the Greek Bible. But right now we don't use that, but I have my favorite versions that we use, and I'm not sure what the UMC will use, but I'm still going to use my favorite Bible. I don't know about you, but.
Mm-hmm. And if you sway one way or the other, is there going to be some new agreements that once you swayed? Well, I didn't know this was going to be a part of it. Oh, I didn't know this was going to be a part of it. I mean, what's the additions to? Because that's my main thought: is which direction you go, and then what's going to be added or deleted or.
Yeah, I don't think they would try to take out portions of the Bible, they would put new versions out there that might change slightly the translation of certain words. So, for example, the virgin was with child, and she bore a son, and he was called Jesus. All right, that's how I like it. But some newer versions say a young mother was with child, and takes the virgin birth right off of it. Now you can study the original word. In some original Greek words include the possibility of young mother. Some are clear when it means virgin, and some are more likely mean virgin. But some people will take the virgin out and just say young mother. I won't ever do that. But we have that going on now in our denomination already.
Well, and I'm even thinking on, we could be some long discussion, but
No.
you know my opinion real quick. Little boys are little boys, and little girls are little girls, and
Yeah.
men are men, and women are women. So,
Yeah.
any comments?
Yeah, it says that God has given them male and female. I think that's definitely, God's ideal, but I've never been the parent of a child that was born with parts that could go either way. I don't know if I know enough on how to deal with that, and I'm smart enough. Nor do I actually want to look into it more, really.
Did the good Lord make that many mistakes? I never thought he did.
No, but in a fallen world, is a special needs child a mistake? Was that God's ideal? There's still a sacred worth to me, and I wouldn't call him a mistake. So it just depends how far we want to trace it and how finally we want to divine it. I'll be honest, I have friends that are gay, and I'll get lunch with them, and they're as gay can be. And I've never known them not to be gay. Now, was that God's ideal way back when he birthed Adam and Eve? I don't know. I tend not to think so, but the reality is they're before me, and I'm going to love them as much as I possibly can. But, I believe very strongly marriage is almost a sacrament. And so I have a very conservative view of that, where I think it's between male and a female. That's been the historic order that is most promulgated and shared the unique relationship that we say at every wedding that Jesus Christ wants to have with each and every one of us. But then people get divorced, people live together, and I still marry them. But I want to hold to a high sacramental theology myself, with a high appreciation for the Word, and I want to stay true to that in my decision making. That makes sense. So I'm pretty close to you, Ron. That's what I want to say. So.
When the big vote, so to speak, comes upon us, is there likely to be a church meeting like this where everybody can speak up and try to urge people to vote their way? Is that likely to happen?
It can look however you want it to look. From here on out, it's partnering with the district superintendent into this discernment process. So if your discernment team wanted to do it like that, and you all encourage them, yeah, we want it to look like this, then you as the laity can determine that. But I can't determine what this looks like here on out for you. I can push you into knowing what the steps are so that you can make the best decision for yourself in the best way possible. So I would certainly hope that you have more opportunity to talk it out and whatnot. So, Nichols, you got a question over there? Bye-bye. Pittsburgh. You're not thinking about going there, are you?
We went to a football camp there, so.
Okay, just the football camp, right? Okay, good.
It feels like, so we talk a lot about the two sides and the fact that the Global Methodist side has to essentially buy their way out. Can you speak a little bit to why it seems that that side's being penalized, if you will? When you have like the other side that basically we don't have to do anything and we can just remain and pay nothing, and then this side has to.
But they also have to change the discipline.
Sure.
Yeah, it feels, I've heard that before, and it feels like that is the case. But another way to potentially look at it would be you could buy an $8 million property for $250,000. That's a steal. You know. So because the property isn't officially ours, we would have to negotiate or follow this process. But yes, it feels like to some the conservatives are being penalized, but the conservatives nationally just got so tired of fighting. This is near what they negotiated to give them a clearer path out. So if the protocol was passed, they'd be able to go freely and get a nest egg of $25 million. Some even said, well, that's not enough. Well, when you get to take the equivalent value of all your properties out, that becomes a much bigger nest egg or of value for people if they look at it from that perspective. So that's kind of how you look at it. Yeah, conservatives who hadn't been in the fight and just watched it on TV, they would question that. But what's his name? Reverend Renfro, Maxie Dunham, Jeff Greenway, Greg Stover, all the national leaders are just tired. And some churches have gotten out and even before this paragraph and paid a lot more just to get out because they're so tired of the constant wrangling.
I guess just to follow up a little bit would just be the fact that I guess this one itself or the direction of the church is to become more progressive. Is that why there's the group that wants to move away then?
What's that?
I said this,
you asked me the same thing, but just a little bit differently.
Sure. Just that the United Methodist Church, as far as the reason that the split has begun is because they want to become more progressive in what they're doing with the churches. And that's why the conservative side's like, we can't continue with this.
Yes, absolutely. There was a retired bishop that, I think from San Francisco area, that went to Alabama and conducted a same-sex wedding under the nose of the local more conservative bishop. And it's just gone kind of haywire since, where people are, it's an expression of their civil disobedience, which for some is a lot bigger deal than for others, you know, and that prophetic ministry of the church. For some, you know, evangelicals, when you come to Christ and you're really living for the Lord, you're in the Bible, you're studying the Word, and You want to reach people for Christ, help them come to faith, go on mission trips. For more progressives who have a faith experience or come to an awakening, activism, political activism, or social activism becomes more of a sacred push for them. So you got Martin Luther King, and then you got Billy Graham, and both two great, faithful, spiritual heroes you can look up to, but they lived that out different tradition points, from different tradition points, I guess. That's an oversimplification of a lot of good God work. But
as complicated as this is, and of course everybody wanting it simple enough they can understand it, it would help if you or somebody would take a piece of paper or pieces of paper and write down UMC at the top, and in the right column would be, what is it, GMC? General Motors Corporation. I know.
yeah, I wish it was that easy.
And under each, as much as possible, I know that it may not be possible in all of the arguments, write what, if you vote for this, you get this column. If you vote for this, you get this column.
Yeah,
I'm
there's
trying to make it simple.
there's documents like that, and they were handed out at the town hall meetings earlier in the year. But so that would be a resource that, if you wanted to take it further, you could easily access and distribute. Yeah. Deb, been raising your hand.
How is the discernment team going to be developed? And when does it have to be put into place?
Yeah, there's some guidelines. I sent out on Friday a link for the bishop's last town hall, where he explained and shared how he took annual conference. And within that link, it's a resource page for all these things, and it outlines the process. And they actually offer some models on what the discernment piece can look like. Now, I don't think we're bound to a certain discernment process. Leadership board can decide that. You all can decide what you want a part of that. You got to follow up? Yeah.
Could you give us that website?
Yeah, it was on the one that goes out on Fridays. I'll put it up here on the board when I pull it up here. Not too hard to remember or write down. Just give me a second.
You passed.
Yes, Steve or Evelyn? Can we get a mic to Evelyn?
Thank you. I have two questions, Chris. One, there's a term that the United Methodist Church uses that I love, and that term is open table for Holy Communion. Is that a theory that will, not theory, but a process that will hold, practice that will hold true still for the United Methodist Church as well as the Global Methodist Church? All are welcome.
I believe so. You know, it's in the liturgy. The table is open to all who earnestly repent of their sins and seek the love of God.
And what about the Reconciling Ministries Church, the network? Where do they fit into this?
Within the United Methodist Church over the last several years, you can organize for different special interests. BMCR, Black Methodists for Church Renewal, moving all across the United States, where many African American leaders would just join together for mutual encouragement, support. Some of them, caucus and get more politically active to town and rural ministries, similar kind of thing. Sometimes the smaller churches feel left out, and they organized, become more of a collective voice at annual conference and at general conference. And so over the years, different conservative and more progressive or liberal groups have formed. And Reconciling Ministries is one of the more liberal ones. United Methodists for Social Action, I think is one. More conservative ones are Wesleyan Covenant Association, Evangelical Fellowship of West Ohio. I've been a couple of others over the years, but Reconciling Ministries, as I can tell, there's a discernment process for that too, where a discernment team goes through a study, and they can choose then to self-identify as a reconciling congregation. And I don't have all the platform positions on the top of my head, but I would think they position themselves to be completely welcoming and all-inclusive.
And it would still fall, like a church like Hope Collective would still fall under the UMC?
Currently, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The way I understand it, you really cannot lead us. You can't make committees. You, as the senior pastor, can give us information, but technically you cannot say, let's start doing this, hand out the papers,
Yes.
that you...
Correct.
Okay.
You want to take it further, the local DS has to be informed, and they will come alongside you in that discernment process. I am being, it's so overwhelming for the DSs, I am being trained on how to go in and monitor or proctor a church disaffiliation vote. I don't know if I'll regret it later or not, but I can always say no. But I feel just, not that I'm choosing one side or the other, but I feel like, by golly, somebody's got to get on the cross and stand in the middle. So I can help other churches at least proctor, not tip or lead, but manage the Robert's Rules of Order for that kind of a vote. But I wouldn't want to do it for here, obviously. You can pray for me on that one. My 2-hour Zoom training is Monday. Like, oh, there's not enough training for something like that. Yeah, Kirk. Oh, sorry, Reed. Come back to Reed. Oh, we'll get Reed and come back to Kirk. Sorry.
Chris, are you aware of any congregations in the West Ohio Conference that have disaffiliated?
Yeah. Some of it happened before this last season got so. There's probably, I want to say, 40 to 60 in Northwest Plains and in the Shawnee River Valley District that disaffiliated. Let's see, between 2009 and 2014.
Was that all underneath the paragraph 25?
No, paragraph 25 wasn't alive at that time, so they got
they had to pay for it. How
they got a lawyer and they negotiated
Yeah.
settlement. There's a church, Scott Kelso's church in Pickerington. It's about 400 or 500, very conservative, very charismatic. They negotiated a leave before this ever got to this point, but not too long ago. And then there's another one that part of their agreement they had to keep quiet about the settlement. Those trailed off, I think, in the hopes that the protocol would pass and it'd be a little easier.
but you don't know of any congregations that have used the 2553
Oh,
paragraph?
there's several getting close.
Getting close, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was any current or not.
Yeah, there's about 80 that are pursuing, I heard, that process in West Ohio. Sydney First has a discernment team. I know there are others in Miami Valley.
Mine was actually just kind of a follow-up. I think I know the answer to this, but just kind of generally for people, I think it's, so we as a congregation could decide to do one or the other. And then because you're not leading that yourself, you could decide. I guess the question would be, what happens if we disaffiliate? What happens to you? What happens to Ty? What happens to those things as far as our church is concerned? So we could decide to leave, and you could decide to leave or stay. Like, so we both can decide.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned that earlier, but just kind of to clarify.
I'll unpack some of the nuances for that. Speaking of Pastor Ty, we'll let him respond to it now. He could. My commitment is to be here as long as it's good for you. And when I was being sought after as a candidate for bishop, one of the stipulations was that I felt like, and what was part of the call was that you could be a pastor or a bishop for anybody in any kind of church. And so I really got to that point where other thoughts like in church history, there have been all sorts of kinds of churches. And they're all beautiful expressions of the living water. Now, I've worshiped at Baptist churches before. That's not I don't ever see that being my weekly flavor, but I love Baptist churches. I love charismatic churches. I went to a reconciling congregation the night before the Gay Pride Parade in Columbus. That was like Christmas Eve. I mean, it was packed out. And being in the midst of that congregation, I began to understand more of just where they're coming from. Now, that's not my natural persuasion, but so I feel like no matter what this church would do, and I don't think it'd be any of those extremes, but I would love to love you guys as long as you let me be on the ground loving you guys. And there's different ways for me to do that regardless. There's different, what's the plural of status? Statuses. I'm going to call you direct every week, Jerry Lee. You're going to straighten me out. Her name was Evelyn Hines in my first church, and she would take my manuscript and was a former English teacher, and she'd cut it up and tell me where I boogered this grammar rule and that. So I haven't had someone since. Hazel Mills was her name, actually. So there's different statuses I can take that would be allowed to remain an influence or a part of the team here. Ty's in a great spot. His main appointment is with the local Christian school. He's an at-hire, if that's what the term is. So his appointment wouldn't be affected by that whichever way in his work here. Pastor Bob, the same. There's ways for him to stay connected, but each of us our dynamics are a little bit different since our credentialing paths were a little bit different. But it's not a disaster or the sky's not falling on either of us. And when you get as old as I am and you've seen God save your tail as much as He has with me, you stop worrying about stuff like that. I just know God's good. I've got a wife and a family that love me, and I'm a happy man. So.
I have a question going back to something you said earlier about if we didn't make a choice to disaffiliate and things could stay relatively the same. You said we still have in church policy certain things. We're still down the street from one of the most conservative courthouses in the state of Ohio. Are those things that would be expected to stay the same, that the local churches could exercise those freedoms continuing forward? Or would the changes through the UMC be forced to trickle down through the local churches?
Great question. And that's, I think, one of the kickers that you have to, I would hope you'd consider. Right now we have a bishop that would honor that. But there are those of Methodism that if they had the opportunity, because they come from more of an activist tradition, they might try to circumvent, skirt, push what they think is the holier option. So with other times in our life and appointment past and horror stories you've heard from other churches, I don't think anything is guaranteed. If that makes sense. And there was a piece of legislation, I'll speak a little more and risk getting myself in trouble, but there's a piece of legislation that has come up at annual conference every time. And you're either conservative or a liberal. And so far, it hasn't passed, but by a handful of votes. So if you take 15% of the churches out, the most conservative churches out, and 15% of the most conservative votes, this caucus group, isn't going to stop bringing that. And that's my personal opinion. Everyone online and who's examining this for all things appropriate. So. But you can feel free to differ, I guess, if you want. But I don't think any church can count on that 5 years on down the road.
So
So is that 15% UMC or GMC?
That'd be 15%, or approximately, the bishop said, are pursuing the path of disaffiliation. And it's assumed that those 15% are mostly GMC, but they have the option of becoming independent or joining another Methodist, United Methodist or joining another Methodist expression. There's an Orthodox Methodist church, there's a Free Methodist, there's AME Methodist. Hey, let's do that. We have some rock and worship then. Any other have a question or clarification? I hope anything I said was only good, meant for good, and I hope you heard me, heard my heart, and don't overread your worry into the what. Does that make sense? We all have our fears, and sometimes we read our fear into our situation to an inordinate extent. So that Jesus is still Lord of the church. We still welcome anyone that moves. You know, if they come to breakfast, they're going to get fed. Right, Myrna? Right. And we're going to love them. And we're still going to have worship. And we're probably still going to have, we'll probably be the last church that ever does not have a bell choir. I think we're going to have the bell choir for as long as any church in Christendom. Tell them, you guys just got invited to play where? Where were you telling me today? Yes. Yeah. Check that out. Yeah. The Piqua Civic Band's like the Boston Philharmonic. That's an honor. Isn't that right, Kurt? Yeah, see? I got a brother. Anybody have any questions? I'm running out of dendrite energy, so an hour, 15 minutes. Jerry Lee, bring it.
I said last question last time. Now I lied.
That's okay.
Has the laity committee, I'm new to this church, so I don't know this. Is that already formed? Is that waiting, the discernment committee, is that waiting to be formed if that's how the church decides to go?
Yeah, it's waiting to be formed. We currently have not felt a lot of pressure either way. So you don't have to talk nasty, write nasty email, or twist my arm, but just tell me. It'd be interesting for each of you to email me or one of the others in leadership what you'd like to see. Yes, please consider forming the discernment committee and process. So let us know.
Can you promise that doing something like that doesn't mean you're volunteering?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay,
You might,
awesome.
You still might get asked, but you're allowed to say no, you know.
I don't say no very well.
You know.
I have a boundaries class coming up in a few weeks.
There you go. Go to the boundaries class, and then we'll ask you. Yeah, if we can just keep this, I know good people on all sides, and I would just love it if we could be a beacon of light and love and respect and honor and dignity for all. So I think you're all pretty cool. You even read Sevitz. All right, let's all go buy a Jeep at Ron's tonight and bless the brother. All right? Lord, thanks for this amazing group and the fun sharing, and hope you seasoned it all with your mercy and love, and allow it to settle. I shared a vision I had with Lisa a couple days ago. I just really feel like you're stirring your your harvest fields, your wheat fields, and you're getting ready to have a big ingathering. And you want your church ready. You don't want your church split and bruised and angry and cranky. You want us to be ready and anticipating the amazing embrace from you, our great Lord. So we trust the Holy Spirit working in each and every person here. The unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace that's within each and every one of us. And that the one who's greater in us than we who are in the world. So lead, direct, and guide. Keep on keeping on. Dear Lord, amen.